Picture this. You walk into a room, and without saying a word, every man's attention shifts to you. But it's not your looks, your clothes, or your charm. It's something deeper, something psychological that Freud discovered decades ago, something most women completely ignore. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Men don't fall for what you think they do. They fall for something you've been taught to suppress, to hide, to apologize for. And while you're busy trying to be perfect, you're actually pushing away the very thing that creates magnetic attraction. Freud understood the human psyche in ways that still make people uncomfortable today. He knew that what drives desire isn't what we're told it is. It's not about being agreeable, sweet, or constantly available. It's about something far more primal, far more powerful. Have you ever noticed how some women effortlessly attract men while others, equally beautiful, equally kind, seem invisible? The difference isn't luck, it's psychology. Most women have been programmed to believe they need to shrink, to be less, to make others comfortable. But what if that's exactly what's killing your magnetic power? We're about to reveal what Freud discovered about female attraction, the one thing that makes men fall hard, but women keep suppressing. This isn't about games or manipulation. This is about reclaiming your authentic power. Stay until the end. This could change everything. There is something that draws him in before she ever speaks. It isn't her smile or her dress or even her body. It's the echo of something ancient, something he doesn't remember but has always longed for. Freud called it the return of the repressed, the involuntary return to the mother figure hidden in memory. A woman's presence can strike this chord, without effort awakening a familiarity too deep for words. He feels safe, disarmed, not because she is kind, but because she is known to his unconscious. Her silence becomes a melody he has heard before, but never traced back to its origin. What most women ignore is that men are not looking for conversation when they fall. They are responding to something they can't describe. It's the way she moves, without demanding, the way her eyes hold without invading. Freud would say the unconscious recognizes what the conscious mind denies. He does not fall for who she is, but for what she evokes. And she evokes what he has lost, or what he never truly had. The woman becomes a portal, not a person, a symbol, not a self. This is why beauty alone does not bind. This is why the woman who chases and shows too much leaves no room for the invisible to work. He needs space to imagine, to project, to return internally to the unfinished business of childhood. A man falls deeply, not when he sees clearly, but when he senses mystery cloaked in softness. She becomes an enigma his soul wants to resolve, not a puzzle his mind can solve. And in that tension, he remains enchanted. The real power lies in her being rather than her doing, not in the words she says, but in the energy she carries. Freud understood that the unconscious isn't persuaded by logic or even beauty. It responds to the familiar scent of memory, of longing, of unresolved desire. And when a woman unknowingly radiates this frequency, she becomes unforgettable. Not because she tried to be, but because she awakened the oldest feeling he's ever had, the one he never named but never forgot. There is a kind of woman who lingers in his thoughts long after she leaves. She didn't say much, but she left him stirred. Freud believed this is where the unconscious takes control, pulling from old emotional maps that never healed. A woman with mystery becomes a mirror, reflecting his hidden questions and broken dreams. She heals without touching and wounds without intending. He both chases and fears her, because she holds a power no logic can undo. Her mystery is not confusion but depth, and in that depth he senses both salvation and danger. The man doesn't want what is simple. He craves what awakens him, and what awakens him is not clarity but complexity wrapped in calm. Freud would say that mystery stirs the unresolved conflict between desire and fear. He wants her because she is unknown. He needs her because she threatens to make him whole. And wholeness, to the unhealed man, feels like death of the familiar pain. She becomes a storm and a shelter, a source of light and the keeper of shadows. This is why the woman who explains herself too quickly is forgotten. When you reveal all, he stops searching. When you define everything, he stops feeling. The mystery must not be performed, but protected, not faked, but lived. To remain unfathomable is not to be deceptive, but to stay rooted in your own emotional world. The more she guards her soul, the more he aches to enter it, not out of curiosity but out of instinct, because somewhere in that unknown, he believes his missing pieces are waiting. Mystery is memory dressed in new skin. It is the reappearance of something lost through someone new, and that is why it heals and hurts. It gives him hope of reclaiming what was once denied. But it also reminds him of every time he reached for love and found pain. The mysterious woman does not fix him. She reveals him. She does not soothe him. She awakens what he buried. And in that awakening he calls it love. But what he really feels is the echo of a wound recognizing its twin. The modern woman often believes that clarity is the key to connection, that the more she explains, shows and proves, the more he will stay. But Freud knew the opposite to be true. When everything is exposed, the unconscious loses interest. Desire lives in the unknown, and when you leave no space for imagination, you starve his psyche of projection. He stops seeing you as a mystery and starts seeing you as a manual. Clear, predictable, forgettable. A man does not fall for facts. He falls for feelings he cannot trace. The less he can define her, the more she lives in his mind. Freud spoke of how our inner world depends on fantasy to keep emotional hunger alive. The overexposed woman becomes a closed book, not because she lacks worth, but because she revealed the last page too soon. There is no more suspense, no more unfolding, no more wondering. And the unconscious retreats, disappointed. She thinks her openness makes her lovable, but it often makes her replaceable. Because once he knows everything, he no longer needs to stay curious. Mystery is not about being cold or distant. It's about holding back just enough to keep him reaching. Freud taught that repression feeds desire. And in seduction, what is held in silence often speaks the loudest. The woman who leaves space for him to wonder becomes unforgettable. Not because she hides, but because she lets him search. Power lies in suggestion, not in explanation. In presence, not in performance. A woman who understands this doesn't rush to be understood. She invites without offering too much. She allows him to build the bridge without handing him the map. And as he builds, he invests. As he invests, he attaches. The more she stays rooted in her own mystery, the more his unconscious makes her the center of its myth. Not because she asked for it, but because she left room for him to imagine. He may not say it, but he longs to be seen in a way that words can't capture. Freud understood that the unconscious doesn't respond to logic or praise. It responds to recognition, to the quiet acknowledgement of the hidden self. A man falls for the woman who feels him without needing to understand him, who listens with her eyes, not her mouth, who receives him without reforming him. She becomes the sanctuary his psyche never had. In a world that demands performance, the woman who simply witnesses becomes magnetic. She doesn't push him to open, yet he does. Not because she insists, but because she holds space without pressure. Freud called this transference, the projection of unresolved needs onto someone who feels emotionally familiar. He sees in her the presence he missed. She makes him feel like he matters without doing anything. Her stillness speaks louder than advice ever could. Most women try to connect by talking, by offering solutions, questions, or comfort. But the deeper male psyche isn't moved by words. It is moved by energy. by the subtle, the quiet, the unseen. The woman who makes him feel seen without speaking enters his inner world in silence, and once there, she stays. Not as an idea, but as an imprint. She becomes part of the narrative he replays at night, not because of what she said, but because of how she made him feel when she said nothing. This kind of woman doesn't heal him. She allows him to unfold. She doesn't rescue. She reflects. She doesn't mother. She mirrors. And in that mirroring, he feels both exposed and safe. Freud believed that deep relationships awaken our earliest emotional patterns. When a man finds a woman who meets him with emotional stillness, it touches the part of him that yearns to be held without being fixed. And that feeling is so rare, he mistakes it for love. But it's deeper than love. It's remembrance. He looks at her like she is the answer. But Freud would ask, the answer to what? Often what he calls passion is not love at all. It is emotional hunger in disguise. A hunger born from neglect, from abandonment, from something missing long before. She appeared. When he meets a woman who fits the shape of his inner lack, the feeling is overwhelming. But it is not love. It is a craving to complete a broken pattern. She mistakes his intensity for depth. But intensity without awareness is just urgency. The urgency to fill a void that she did not create. Freud taught that we repeat what we do not repair. And so he clings, not because she is the one, but because she is the wound's perfect fit. She feels chosen, but she was needed. And there is a dangerous difference. Passion becomes a mask for pain, and attachment becomes a symptom of trauma. This is why the relationship feels so powerful, yet so unstable, because it's not built on reality. It's built on unconscious reenactment. He is trying to relive something that once hurt, hoping this time it will heal. But it rarely does. The same fire that draws him in will burn them both. And the woman, if she is unaware, will confuse his hunger for devotion, when in truth she is just the emotional bandage he never learned to live without. A man doesn't fall for her. He falls into her, like an old memory disguised as new love. Freud's wisdom reminds us that the past always whispers into the present. What looks like romance may be repetition. What feels like fate may be a loop. And unless both wake up to this, the relationship will be haunted. Not by what they do to each other, but by what they each never healed before they met. At first, it feels like intimacy. He opens up, reveals his wounds, trusts her with his shadows. She listens, she supports, she becomes the place where his pain feels safe. But slowly, without noticing, she shifts from lover to healer. Freud warned of this subtle transformation. The woman who becomes his therapist loses her place in his desire. Because desire does not grow where there is diagnosis. It needs polarity, not analysis. She thinks she is helping. She thinks her love is enough to heal him. But healing is not her role, and love is not therapy. Freud believed that transference can seduce both ways. The man projects his wounds onto her, but she too may project her need to be needed. When she becomes the rescuer, she steps out of her feminine energy and into a role of emotional authority. And the dynamic shifts. She is no longer his equal. She is now his emotional parent. This dynamic may feel powerful, but it breeds resentment. He needs her, but he also resents her, because she sees too much, knows too much, feels too much. He cannot feel desire for the one who reminds him of his weakness. He begins to pull away, not from lack of love, but from the shame of being emotionally naked. And she feels rejected, not knowing that her healing presence has turned her into a symbol of his inner child's shame. A woman must choose. Does she want to be his mirror or his mystery, his therapist or his lover? She cannot be both. Freud's insight reminds us that seduction ends where analysis begins. The relationship dies not because of lack of love, but because of emotional imbalance. When she stops being a woman and starts being a solution, she disappears from his fantasy. And without fantasy, there is no desire, only dependence dressed as connection. He says he wants a woman, but watch closely. He wants to be soothed, not challenged, held, not mirrored, obeyed, not met. Freud uncovered this contradiction in the male psyche. He rejects the mother figure with words, but seeks her with need. The man who has not separated from the maternal image will always search for her in his lovers, not consciously. But through patterns, expectations, and hidden dependencies, the woman becomes his emotional caretaker. She listens, forgives, understands. She absorbs his chaos and calls it love. But Freud warned that when desire is entangled with unresolved maternal longing, the relationship becomes incestuous in the psyche, not physically but emotionally. She becomes the womb he missed, the mother he lost, the comfort he never got, and in that comfort, passion suffocates. Many women enter this role unknowingly. Their nurturing is mistaken for love, but it becomes a trap, because once she becomes his mother, he stops seeing her as his woman. Freud showed that the Oedipal tension never truly dies, it just shifts. The boy in him wants to be saved, but the man in him cannot love the one who does the saving. This contradiction keeps the relationship locked in cycles of need and resentment. To love a man who has not faced this within himself is to become a substitute, not a partner. He doesn't see her for who she is. He sees her for what she gives. And the moment she withholds, he accuses her of abandonment, not because she failed, but because his wound reopened. Until he becomes conscious of this projection, every relationship will be a reenactment of the same story, a story where love always loses to need. There is a silence that echoes louder than words, a distance that burns deeper than touch. Freud taught that the psyche responds not only to presence, but to absence, especially when that absence awakens the primal fear of loss. The woman who knows how to disappear with grace holds a secret power. She becomes unforgettable not by being everywhere, but by being just beyond reach. His mind fills the space she leaves, and in that space, longing grows. When a woman is constantly available, she becomes part of the landscape. Familiar, predictable. But when she steps back, she becomes a mystery again. Freud believed that longing is born from lack. That desire grows where fulfillment is paused. The woman who dares to retreat invites him to feel his own emotional hunger, not because she manipulates, but because she understands that space speaks, and the unconscious always listens. He remembers her more in her absence than in her presence, not because she was perfect, but because she left an imprint, an emotional trace that his psyche cannot erase. Freud knew that love is not just built in connection. It is carved in absence, in the pauses, the waiting, the what-ifs. The woman who vanishes without punishment or explanation becomes a question he must answer, and in answering, he attaches deeper. Her absence is not cruelty. It is clarity. It separates the man who was present from convenience, from the one who is pulled by soul. It reveals his truth, not just his need. Freud reminds us that the unconscious does not lie, and when she is gone, it is his unconscious that begins to speak. Through dreams, through ache, through memory. That is her final seduction. She does not chase, she disappears, and in doing so, she becomes eternal. If this opened your eyes to something you always felt, but could never name, don't just watch in silence. Subscribe now. There's more truth waiting for you. The kind that doesn't just explain love, it changes the way you live it.